Exposing the failures of the UK's Financial Ombudsman Service, a call for reform. Introduction to the UK's systemic failure in the Financial Ombudsman Service, FOS. The United Kingdom has been rocked by numerous scandals in recent years, revealing systemic failures that have led to significant harm to individuals and eroded public trust in institutions. Among these scandals, the Financial Ombudsman Service, FOS, stands out as an example of a system designed to protect consumers but falling short in its execution. Established to resolve disputes between consumers and financial businesses, the FOS has faced criticism for its inability to serve consumers effectively, with issues such as incompetence, bias, and lack of transparency plaguing the organization. The FOS was created to provide an efficient, effective, and economic recourse for consumers who feel wronged by financial firms. In theory, it offers a vital service, ensuring that ordinary people have access to justice without the need for costly and time-consuming legal proceedings. However, the reality is far from this ideal. Consumers have raised concerns about the FOS's ability to handle complaints fairly and effectively, with some alleging that the organization often sides with financial institutions, even when evidence supports the consumer's claims. One of the most significant issues undermining the FOS's credibility is the perceived incompetence of its case handlers. Consumers have reported feeling unheard and unvalued due to a lack of professionalism and expertise among those responsible for investigating their complaints. This lack of competence not only erodes trust in the FOS, but also raises questions about its ability to deliver fair and impartial decisions. Compounding the problem, the FOS has been accused of bias and unfair decision-making processes. Numerous complaints suggest that the organization frequently favors financial institutions over consumers, even in cases where fraudulent information from financial firms has influenced its decisions. This bias further undermines consumer trust and perpetuates the power imbalance between financial institutions and their customers. The FOS's reluctance to rigorously verify claims made by firms allows these institutions to evade responsibility and leaves consumers without the justice they seek. The FOS process and its flaws. The Financial Ombudsman Service, FOS, process begins when a consumer files a complaint with their financial institution. The institution is expected to respond with a final response, after which the consumer has 6 months to escalate the complaint to the FOS. This time frame appears reasonable, but the ambiguity surrounding what constitutes a final response creates confusion and opportunities for exploitation by financial firms. Consumers often assume that the 6-month window starts when they receive a comprehensive resolution or when the financial firm has addressed all points raised in their complaint. However, this is not always the case. Financial firms exploit the system's vagueness by issuing premature final response letters that do not address all the consumer's complaints or issues. Consequently, when the consumer follows up with the financial firm for an update, the firm may not respond, considering the matter closed. By the time the consumer raises the issue with the Financial Ombudsman Service, FOS, the 6-month period has often lapsed, leaving them without recourse. In these situations, the consumer is told that their complaint is outside the FOS's jurisdiction and cannot be addressed. This practice unfairly disadvantages consumers and allows financial firms to evade scrutiny and accountability for their misconduct. Consumers who cannot bring their complaints to the Financial Ombudsman Service are left with the only alternative of taking the matter to court. This option is costly, time-consuming, and stressful, particularly for smaller incidents. As a result, financial firms continue to abuse their position, avoiding accountability for their actions. The lack of clarity surrounding the final response and the 6-month window creates a system that is easily manipulated by financial institutions, leaving consumers vulnerable and without access to justice. This situation underscores the urgent need for reform to ensure that the Financial Ombudsman Service process is fair, transparent, and effective in protecting consumers' rights. #Inadequate investigations and bias towards financial institutions. The Financial Ombudsman Service, FOS, has been criticized for its approach to investigating complaints, which often leaves consumers feeling that their claims have not been thoroughly examined. In numerous instances, the FOS appears to accept financial institutions' statements at face value without conducting a rigorous investigation into the consumer's allegations. This approach not only undermines the credibility of the FOS, but also perpetuates a power imbalance between consumers and financial firms, ultimately impacting the resolution of disputes. One of the primary concerns regarding the Financial Ombudsman Service's investigation process is the perceived bias towards financial institutions. Consumers have reported that the FOS often sides with financial firms, even when there is evidence supporting the consumer's claims. This bias is further exemplified in cases where the FOS has failed to address fraudulent activities, despite clear indications of wrongdoing by the financial institution. In some extreme cases, the FOS has allowed fraudulent information from financial firms to influence its decisions, leading to unjust outcomes for consumers. The power imbalance between consumers and financial institutions is a significant factor contributing to the inadequate investigations conducted by the Financial Ombudsman Service. Financial firms often have more resources and expertise at their disposal, enabling them to present their case more effectively than consumers. This disparity can lead to the FOS giving more weight to the financial institution's arguments, resulting in an unfair advantage in the dispute resolution process. Moreover, the opaque nature of the FOS's decision-making process and the absence of a robust mechanism for transparency and appealing decisions further exacerbate this power imbalance, leaving consumers feeling helpless and without recourse. The impact of this bias and inadequate investigation process is far-reaching. Consumers who have experienced these issues often feel disillusioned and financially vulnerable, questioning the very purpose of the Financial Ombudsman Service, FOS. The lack of trust in the FOS's ability to act as a fair and impartial mediator erodes consumer confidence in the financial dispute resolution process and undermines the overall effectiveness of the service. Addressing these concerns and ensuring that the FOS conducts thorough, unbiased investigations is crucial to restoring public trust and protecting consumers' rights. Systemic failures and consumer dissatisfaction. Systemic failures within the Financial Ombudsman Service, FOS, have led to widespread consumer dissatisfaction and a loss of trust in the institution. One of the most glaring issues is the perceived incompetence of case handlers. Consumers have reported that case handlers often lack the necessary expertise to handle complex financial disputes, leading to mishandled complaints and unresolved issues. This lack of professionalism not only undermines the credibility of the FOS, but also leaves consumers feeling unheard and unvalued. In addition to incompetence, the Financial Ombudsman Service has been accused of bias towards financial institutions. Numerous complaints have surfaced alleging that the Financial Ombudsman Service often sides with financial firms, even in cases where evidence clearly supports the consumer's claims. This bias is further exemplified in instances where the Financial Ombudsman Service has allowed fraudulent information from financial firms to influence its decisions. In one such case, a consumer raised a subject access request to the Financial Ombudsman Service, only to discover that the organization had accepted fraudulent evidence without scrutiny. Despite questioning the Financial Ombudsman Service about this issue, the organization failed to take any action to correct the situation, causing severe problems for the consumer. Unfair decision-making processes further exacerbate the problem. The decision-making process within the Financial Ombudsman Service, FOS, remains notably opaque, with consumers frequently reporting that they are not provided with clear explanations for the outcomes of their complaints. This lack of transparency contributes to a perception of arbitrariness and makes it challenging for consumers to understand whether their cases were handled fairly. The absence of a robust mechanism for appealing decisions exacerbates these transparency issues, leaving consumers feeling helpless and without recourse. The impact of these systemic failures is far-reaching. Consumers who have experienced these issues often feel disillusioned and financially vulnerable, questioning the very purpose of the Financial Ombudsman Service. The lack of trust in the FOS's ability to act as a fair and impartial mediator erodes consumer confidence in the financial dispute resolution process and undermines the overall effectiveness of the service. Addressing these concerns and ensuring that the FOS operates with transparency, accountability, and impartiality is crucial to restoring public trust and protecting consumers' rights. Aggravating issues since 2018 and lack of change. In 2018, the Channel 4 Dispatches program aired an exposé revealing severe training deficiencies and questionable decision-making processes at the Financial Ombudsman Service, FOS. Despite the public scrutiny and calls for reform, it appears that little has changed within the organization. In some cases, the situation has even worsened, leaving consumers disillusioned and financially vulnerable. One of the most concerning issues is the FOS's failure to recognize or address fraudulent activities. In some instances, case handlers should have identified signs of fraud, but did not take appropriate reporting actions through suspicious activity reports to the National Crime Agency, NCA. This critical failure in their responsibility to detect and address fraud raises questions about their competence and effectiveness. It also suggests a possible complicity in ignoring glaring issues, making the current environment even more detrimental than previously uncovered. Consumers who turn to the Financial Ombudsman Service for justice often find themselves entangled in a process that seems more intent on protecting financial institutions than addressing their grievances. This erosion of trust is compounded by the FOS's reluctance to revisit decisions, even when new evidence emerges. For example, in the case of Professor Kelly, who lost a significant sum to a fraudster, the Financial Ombudsman Service changed its stance without adequate explanation, highlighting the service's inconsistency and unpredictability. The lack of change since the 2018 exposé is particularly troubling. Despite the revelations and calls for reform, the Financial Ombudsman Service continues to operate with many of the same systemic issues that led to widespread consumer dissatisfaction. This inaction has left consumers feeling disillusioned and financially vulnerable, questioning the very purpose of the Financial Ombudsman Service. The ongoing failures within the organization underscore the urgent need for comprehensive reform to restore public trust and ensure that consumers are protected in financial disputes. The impact of leaked documents and lack of transparency. The role of leaked documents in exposing the Financial Ombudsman Service's FOS failures cannot be overstated. In several instances, these documents have provided undeniable proof of misinformation that influenced the FOS's decisions, ultimately leading to unjust outcomes for consumers. Despite the gravity of these revelations, the FOS's response has been disappointingly inadequate, often sidestepping the core issues and failing to address the fundamental problems within the organization. This lack of transparency and accountability has further eroded public trust in the FOS and its ability to effectively resolve financial disputes. One particularly concerning case involved a consumer who experienced issues with their financial institutions, including having their accounts closed, after the Financial Ombudsman Service, OS, closed their cases without a satisfactory resolution. The consumer raised a subject access request, SAR, to understand the situation, but the FOS did not disclose any unusual information. However, leaked documents from the financial firm revealed shocking claims made to the FOS, which were evidently fraudulent. Despite the consumer questioning the FOS about these claims, the organization failed to take any action to correct the situation or report the firm to the authorities for potential money laundering and fraud. This lack of transparency and accountability has left the consumer in a precarious position, with severe financial and emotional repercussions. The FOS's response to these leaked documents has been equally troubling. When confronted with the issues raised by these documents, even at the highest levels, the FOS has often recommended that consumers approach the Information Commissioner's Office, ICO. This effectively sidesteps the fundamental problems within the FOS and undermines its role in addressing financial disputes. By deflecting responsibility and failing to address the systemic issues exposed by these leaks, the FOS is contributing to a potential cover-up of fraudulent activities and undermining the very essence of its purpose. The impact of leaked documents extends beyond individual cases, revealing a deeper, more systemic lack of transparency within the Financial Ombudsman Service. Consumers frequently report that they are not provided with clear explanations for the outcomes of their complaints, contributing to a perception of arbitrariness and a lack of trust in the organization. The absence of a robust mechanism for appealing decisions further exacerbates these transparency issues. The Financial Ombudsman Service's failure to address these concerns, even when confronted with leaked documents highlighting its shortcomings, raises serious questions about its commitment to accountability and its ability to protect consumers' rights in financial disputes. Conclusion and call for reform. The Financial Ombudsman Service, FOS, has been plagued by systemic failures that have led to widespread consumer dissatisfaction and a loss of trust in the institution. The perceived incompetence of case handlers, bias towards financial institutions, and unfair decision-making processes are just some of the issues that have contributed to this situation. Consumers have reported feeling unheard and unvalued, with their claims not being thoroughly examined, and the FOS seemingly accepting financial institutions' statements at face value. This has resulted in unjust outcomes for consumers and a power imbalance between consumers and financial firms. The 2018 Channel 4 dispatches revealed severe training deficiencies and questionable decision-making processes at the Financial Ombudsman Service. However, despite the public scrutiny and calls for reform, it appears that little has changed within the organization. In some cases, the situation has even worsened, with the Financial Ombudsman Service failing to recognize or address fraudulent activities. This lack of change and inaction has left consumers feeling disillusioned and financially vulnerable, questioning the very purpose of the Financial Ombudsman Service. The need for comprehensive reform within the FOS is clear. The organization must address the systemic issues that have led to widespread consumer dissatisfaction and a loss of trust. This includes improving the training and expertise of case handlers, ensuring that investigations are thorough and unbiased, and implementing a more transparent decision-making process. The FOS must also be held accountable for its actions and decisions, with a robust mechanism for appealing decisions and addressing consumer complaints. The potential consequences of inaction are significant. If the Financial Ombudsman Service fails to address these systemic issues, it risks becoming irrelevant and ineffective in its role as a mediator in financial disputes. This would leave consumers without a viable alternative to costly and time-consuming legal proceedings, further eroding public trust in the financial dispute resolution process. On the other hand, if the Financial Ombudsman Service can successfully implement comprehensive reforms, it has the potential to restore public trust and become a truly effective and impartial mediator in financial disputes. This would be a significant step forward in protecting consumers' rights and ensuring that financial institutions are held accountable for their actions.